Today, we're looking into a truly mind-bending mystery that kind of bridges the gap between ancient history and modern phenomena. Okay, let's dive into this. We're investigating some pretty wild claims made by ancient astronaut theorists regarding some of the oldest writings known to humanity. The core question we're exploring today, whether 3,000-year-old Hindu texts actually contain physical, documented evidence of extraterrestrial encounters. It's a fascinating look at how ancient words might just be describing very, very modern concepts. So, this entire explainer is framed around a captivating investigation into India's most ancient Sanskrit texts. Now, for centuries, we've read these scriptures as, profound mythological and spiritual doctrines. But what if we've been looking through the wrong lens this whole time? What if, as some theorists suggest, these ancient accounts aren't just spiritual metaphors or allegories, but are actually literal historical records of UFO sightings? We're going to look strictly at what the source material presents to understand exactly how these researchers are coming to such an incredible conclusion. Part 1, The Foundation, Ancient Texts and Epics. To really kick off this investigation, we first need to establish the sheer age and the massive scale of our source material. That foundation starts with the Vedas. These are 4 books that make up the absolute oldest of India's ancient Sanskrit texts, and they've carefully preserved the bedrock of Hinduism for more than 3 millennia. But the story definitely doesn't stop with just those 4 books. There are numerous additional manuscripts that expand heavily on these foundational teachings, creating this massive, sprawling library of ancient human history and belief. Beyond the Vedas themselves, you have the great epics. The 2 most prominent ones are the Mahabharata, which literally translates to the great story of Bharat, an ancient name for India, and the Ramayana. And within the pages of these sprawling epics, humanity's direct everyday interaction with the gods is thoroughly, meticulously documented. We're not talking about passing mentions here. These texts feature extensive, highly detailed narratives of humans and divine beings coexisting and interacting on a regular basis. Part 2, The Suspects, the global light beings. So, who exactly were these divine beings interacting with ancient humans? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the focus on the central characters of these texts, the Hindu gods themselves. Look at the literal translation of the words used by the ancients here. The highest class of these Hindu gods are called the Devas. This group includes the famous trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But check out this Sanskrit translation. Devas literally means light beings, or the shining ones. And according to the texts, these light beings didn't just sit up in the heavens, they actually came down and actively taught humanity advanced skills. Everything from astronomy and charting the stars to the manufacturing of complex weapons. Now, ancient astronaut theorists point out something incredibly curious when you cross-reference this with other completely isolated ancient cultures, right? So ancient India had the Devas, the light beings. But then over in ancient Irish mythology, we find the Tuatha Dé Danann. They're a divine race described identically as light beings who descended from the sky in whirlwinds to bring civilization. And then, in ancient Sumeria, you have the Anunnaki, the sky gods, similarly described as having a luminous appearance. So we're looking at completely different, geographically isolated cultures describing the exact same type of shining beings descending from the sky to teach humanity. Which raises a massive, almost unavoidable question posed by these theorists. Is it possible that the beings described in the Vedas are the exact same beings that visited ancient Ireland, Sumeria, and other cultures? Could it be that rather than isolated myths, we're actually looking at a global record of a shared extraterrestrial visitor interacting with humanity throughout time? Part 3, The Vehicles Inside the Vimana. If these beings were physical visitors, well, how did they get here? Let's move our investigation from the beings themselves over to their incredible technology. Enter the Vimana. According to the ancient astronaut theory, one of the most compelling aspects of these Hindu stories is that the gods didn't just, float down on magical clouds. They traveled in specific flying machines. The Vedic texts describe these Vimanas in stunningly technical detail. They're explicitly described as brightly lit aerial vehicles that created giant lights in the sky. These were machines that held pilots, carried passengers, and were equipped with literal arsenals of weapons. To really grasp where theorists are coming from, consider this quote from researcher Giorgio Tsoukalos. Why would God need a vehicle with which to move from point A to point B? The argument here is simple but really profound. An omnipotent, purely spiritual deity simply wouldn't need a nuts and bolts mechanical ship to travel around. Theorists argue that these texts aren't describing spiritual chariots at all. Instead, they're describing actual, physical, technological vehicles that our ancestors witnessed with their own eyes and then tried their absolute best to describe using the vocabulary of their time. I mean, when you put the ancient descriptions of the Vimana side by side with modern military technology, the parallels are frankly startling. The texts describe machines that hold different people, require trained pilots to operate, and deploy devastating weapons. They honestly sound way less like magical carriages and much, much more like modern fighter aircraft and heavy bombers. But guys, it gets even more technical. Some Vedic texts actually attempt to explain the propulsion systems of these craft. So the crucial point is this highly specific description of a mercury-based engine. Modern speculative physics suggests that if you create flowing baths of liquid mercury spinning in a vortex and you apply the precise electromagnetic field to it, it creates strange torsions that could, theoretically, generate a propulsive force. The fact that a 3,000-year-old text is talking about mercury engines to achieve flight, that is absolutely astounding to researchers. Part 4. The modern connection, ancient myths, or modern UFOs. This takes us to the final and perhaps most thrilling part of our investigation, bridging the gap from ancient descriptions right up to our modern skies. So the Vimanas were said to possess some pretty extreme capabilities. The ancient texts say these craft could travel faster than the human eye could even track. They had the ability to cloak themselves, to become completely invisible. And even more intriguingly, some Vimanas were described as being designed to fly in the air, while others were explicitly described as being used underwater. This transmedium capability, the ability to operate seamlessly in both the atmosphere and the ocean, is a highly specific technological feat. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact connection theorists are making to modern unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. As Tukalos notes, modern-day UFO videos show craft doing exactly this, stopping on a dime, changing direction instantly, and pulling G-forces that would literally destroy a conventional aircraft and kill a human pilot. According to the source material, these exact same impossible flight dynamics exist right there in the ancient Vedic descriptions. So just to neutrally summarize the conclusion drawn by these theorists, they believe the ancient Hindus were not just writing fantasy. They were acting as historical journalists, doing their absolute best to record actual, physical machines that they saw flying around in their skies. For all intents and purposes, theorists argue that these ancient cultures left behind a record of the Vedas as historical UFO evidence, meticulously documenting what they viewed as vehicles used by beings to reach the realm of the gods. Which leaves us with this final crazy thought to ponder. As you look at the evidence presented from these ancient Sanskrit texts, the glowing Vimanas, the mercury engines, the transmedium travel, you really have to ask yourself, are we just reading beautifully crafted myths about magical chariots? Or are the Vedas and the great epics actually providing us with the absolute oldest, most detailed UFO sightings on human record? It completely changes how you view history, doesn't it?